Welcome to your daily discussion with Dena. I invite you to join me right here daily. Now, the topic for today, Juneteenth is here. Juneteenth will be celebrated this year as always in our town at Tatnall Square Park, Saturday, June 17th and June 18th, which is also Father's Day. It will be celebrated from 12 to 9:30 p.m. Now, Juneteenth celebrations always fall on a weekend or within the month of June, usually on one of the teens' date. It is said to be so because many could not remember exactly what date, but it was somewhere within the teens of June. Others say it is a combination of June and the 19th. Either way, it is the date that the information was relayed to former black slaves. 250,000 were told of their freedom. Many broke out in celebration, and henceforth Juneteenth was created. That celebration was referred to as a jubilee or Juneteenth for the 250,000 newly freed black people from their bondage to their white slave masters. And this is the reason for the annual celebration of Juneteenth to this very day. It wasn't about uniting with other races of people at that time or groups that were pushing any agendas, and even less about emphasizing same-sex or interracial marriage or dating or relationships. Now, it wasn't even about sale of cars, furniture, or retail items that we see today. The newly freed slaves wanted desperately to find and unite with their relatives that had been sold off by their masters. They wanted their babies. They wanted to find their babies, their children, their mates, their siblings that had been sold off like cattle by their white oppressors. They wanted to find their family. Many were so overjoyed that some of them simply chose to leave Texas altogether, and all of them wanted desperately to be free from slavery, as far away as they could get from their white enslavers. So when we see Juneteenth posters that show Caucasians smiling and other groups that are referencing Juneteenth, it is a bit hypocritical. It can be seen that way. I mean to represent joy and appreciation, knowing there is yet to be any tangible, any actions, any repentance or atonement to us for what was done. The lack of genuine action speaks volumes. We have to see something that's real reparations or actual authentic restitution to the slave or their descendants. We haven't seen any of that as of to this present day. Until then, I classify it as nothing more than hypocrisy. It is an illusion to be frowned upon. Juneteenth is not something that we should allow any other group other than black descendants of slaves in America to capitalize off of. We just shouldn't. If there's to be an event on the lawn of the White House celebrating or commemorating Juneteenth, it should begin with the current president signing a bill or order that will compensate the descendants of those slaves with reparations first and foremost. Not a study, not a loan, not fixing up a house, not a promise, but actual, real, quantifiable, tangibles, and not just lip service or photo ops that we have become accustomed to. Ops that solve nothing, that give us nothing, or even help us in our struggle today just to maintain. The display only serves as to pacify us in a sense. It pacifies the Negro mind while offering nothing at all of real substance when it comes to the need of black people here in America. It does not resolve America of its debt to her former slaves, nor to the slaves' descendants. In fact, it is a waste of time, it's a waste of energy, and it is almost insulting. Essentially, it's a slap in the face to ADOS or FBA, especially when we are well aware of what the government of America openly and boldly gives freely to non-citizens, what is given to illegal citizens that enter the United States, and so-called migrants that are shown being bused into our own neighborhoods and into our cities each and every day. People that came by choice. It was a choice. And are under no real persecution. They are not being subjugated in the places that they came from, and they are not even under the threat of war in their own countries today, yet are given reparations upon entry. But for what? Why are you allotted monthly incomes from the federal government and from local governments? You're given funds and resources simply for coming to America, and most of the time it's just illegal. You came illegally, but you're given funds. It is the highest in hypocrisy, and it further continues America's legacy of flaunting her malice and discrimination against the indigenous people, black population. Because at this point, we are American citizens. We are here. We're not going anywhere. And the debt is still due. Imagine what reparations could have done and still can do for a group of people that have been purposely denied basic resources and access to wealth. Imagine what would reparations have allowed this most hated group to accomplish on their own. We were never given any land. We wasn't set up financially. Nobody gave us anything as a group to allow us to settle somewhere and govern ourselves and establish ourselves and sustain ourselves. So reparations would have provided freedom from having to deal with white hate and white murder and lynchings and some of the racism and Jim Crow that we had to experience. And it was legally sanctioned by the government of America. Discrimination was sanctioned. It was acceptable. So colorism, and most of all, it could have allowed us to defeat and heal the mental corruption to the black mind, body, soul, all of it that caused the cruel effects that we experienced under white supremacy. We could have had an opportunity to rebuild ourselves, but we were not given the reparation so that we could do that. So a mindset that is ever present, although it is covert today, it is surreptitious, it is still undeniable and evident. And it is passed on to the descendants of these former slave masters. As much as we'd like to deny it, as much as we think marrying and loving them and praying them, it has not resolved that mindset even as we speak. So it is important that the black descendants of slaves control the narrative of Juneteenth, including America's detestable, vile, and hateful history against black skin. They hated the former slaves' existence, and we should not allow it to be revised, the history. In other words, it should not allow to be revised, repackaged, and used as a means for profit by some of the architects of black captivity in repression. Even for the current president of the United States to celebrate Juneteenth on the lawn of the White House, it should be a cause for black people to be cautious and wonder the real intents behind such an event. We must understand that just as everything else we hold dear, and we initiate, it too can be compromised. It can be hijacked, reinvented, redefined, repackaged, and sold back to us with a whole new narrative, a different narrative. And that is far from what it was originally intended to be, which confuses and teaches the next generation falsehoods or lies. So we must take precaution as to deter others from falsifying and controlling the Juneteenth celebrations and narratives. Just by making it a federally recognized holiday, it is likely that that is what it is going to lead to, that it can or will be modified and altered at some point, and really taken from the Black community. Once it is monetized for profit, it will no longer have the same meaning. It will just be profit to the same descendants of our oppressors. So like so many other initiatives we conjure up, it becomes revised of its actual origins, and eventually it will mean nothing. It will just be an opportunity to spend money, and there will be no real meaning behind it. Just another Black originated concept to be stolen. The narrative changed and served to only allow our former slave masters' descendants to profit off of it. Now, we know about the Emancipation Proclamation signing and the 13th Amendment having been done that actually made it official that there would no longer be slavery. And what the 13th Amendment actually did, it adopted it, for it stated that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So please take note of the word except, for except means not including, other than, to leave out. So in other words, that also means that slavery is still acceptable as a punishment for crime. So going to jail can be equated to being put into slavery. That's something to think about. So would it also mean that slavery does kind of still exist today? That's quite interesting. Another discussion for another day. But what we will not do is pretend like this Emancipation Proclamation or 13th Amendment made life good for those people that were freed as slaves, former slaves in America, or the descendants of these Black slaves in America. It was an even more dangerous time for Black people here in America. See, after all of the celebrating was done, the reality seeped in, and Caucasians purposely made it even harder for these former slaves to survive. The government of America provided these newly freed slaves with absolutely nothing. Zilch. Zero. Nothing. No land for them to live on or cultivate and hunt food. No food, no clothes, no place to call home. Not even a penny to their name. And that is true even to this day. America did its best to make it more difficult and almost impossible for these newly freed Blacks to even make a living in order to survive. And we often forget that. To this very day, we have not received reparations or any form of restoration. Just imagine being free but having absolutely none of the things that you need that are necessary to survive as a human being. So when we celebrate Juneteenth, there needs to be a part of the remembrance, a reminder that our need for tangibles, resources, or reparations from our former slave masters or their descendants, it was never met. And what we have attained and maintained was due to the death, the sacrifice of our ancestors in spite of America's failure to provide real resources to any of us. Black people needed resources and restitution. They needed, and we deserved and have earned the right to reparations. And to this very day, it has never been given. It's never been even talked about seriously from the United States of America. Not to the slaves, not to the black descendants of those slaves. Let me just say, this is necessary. This conversation is necessary for black people to have with their children as well, to know and have a clear understanding of what black people have experienced here in America and what obstacles we have had to overcome with none, little, or meager means, without altering or hindering the actual facts of the situation. We don't need to sugarcoat it. The dehumanizing experience needs to be told. We don't have to try to comfort anyone. That includes the slave master's descendants. We must speak truthfully about white America's cruelty to black people, about the persecution, about the subjugation of black people as slaves, and even after being so-called free, it continued even after they were free. So if we do this, we concur or harmonize with the practice of white supremacy rule and oppression when we allow it to be hidden, because real truth of black enslavement and black history is being revised. It is being overlooked. It's being omitted from school lessons, and it's just plain out being ignored. And this is done on purpose, hiding the truth, and even to the point of encouraging educators to evade or discount the impact of slavery on the black mind here in America. That's something that I see every day. It's common now. And none the wiser, we simply accept the statistics when presented, not understanding it may have been skewed against black progress when we are comparing, are constantly being compared to other races. Having enlightenment allows critical thinking, and it enables one to comprehend and appreciate black success in spite of centuries of oppression, discrimination, and denial of simple basic resources. So pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps has been a long, difficult, and it is constant, especially with someone else controlling your boots and your straps. It's like being in a 30-mile race. You are both at the starting line, you and your opponent. But you are walking the race on foot. Why? Because your opponent has taken your tennis shoes from you, and he has denied you water, he has denied you rest, and then your opponent goes and sits in the back of an air-conditioned car that is being driven by his father to complete the race. So he is at the finish line. He's holding your shoes. He's sipping on the water. He's laying back. He's bragging, laughing, and celebrating his win over you, while you continue your long journey with much difficulty, hardship, and pain. This is how I liken what we have experienced and are experiencing. Now, some may not even know that white slave owners were financially compensated by the government of America for releasing their black slaves. They were paid. Some said it was an effort to keep the local slave owners loyal to the Union by Abraham Lincoln. They were paid $300 each in compensation for their slaves. Each slave was worth $300. And according to some, this was paid out to 979 owners for 2,989 slaves. Imagine that kind of money back in those days. Over the 9 months, the Board of Commissioners appointed to administer the act and approved the petition, it was completely or in part from former owners for the freedom of those slaves, and it is in the U.S. National Archives. But these newly freed slaves nor their descendants were ever compensated or even given restitution. We must remember that. Not even rations to help them to build their own society or survive. Somehow, under those circumstances, some still managed to pool what little resources they had, the meager crumbs, and they developed black townships that prospered until white America saw it thriving and decided to destroy those as well. So let's talk about this 40 acres and a mule. It is known, and some may not know, as the Civil War was ending, the recently freed black people were initially promised land to start their independent lives upon. But Lincoln's assassination led to that plan's termination. Further information can be found about this topic also on the History Channel's website. There was a question that was posed to black people when it was decided that they would be let go of. What they did was they wanted to know, and they were asked, what do you want for your own people? This was the question Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton suggested Union General William T. Sherman posed to 20 black pastors in Savannah, Georgia, as the Civil War neared its end, and enslaved black people in America was nearing their freedom. So the black leaders gathered for the January 12th, 1865 meeting with the military officials in a mansion called the Green Meldrum House. They explained that they didn't want to live among white people. They feared it would take years for racial prejudice to dissipate. Instead, they wished to live amongst themselves on a land of their own, a place of their own that would entail redistributing the land of Southern plantation owners. Now, the way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor. And this was said by the Reverend Garrison Frazier. He was a 67-year-old Baptist minister and spokesman for the group, which also included individuals who had been enslaved and lived as free men alike. He further stated, "We want to be placed on land until we are able to buy it and make it our own." Frazier told this to the Union military officials. "We should not have to buy anything. I'm saying this. It should have been given to us freely for all the centuries of free labor to America. We have paid the price." But Stanton knew that the meeting was a groundbreaking one, remarking that for the first time government officials had actually asked black people, black Americans, what they wanted for themselves. He gave the minutes taken at the meeting to Henry Ward Beecher, who is the brother of Uncle Tom's Cabin author Harriet Beecher Stowe. After Beecher read the notes to the congregation of his New York church, the New York Daily Tribune also printed the transcript, and it is February 13, 1865 edition. It provided a historical record and proof that still exists today. It was also printed transcript form in a black publication that is called The Christian Recorder. Now, after meeting with the 20 ministers, Sherman signed Field Order 15 on January 16, 1865. The order would reserve 400,000 acres of Confederate land for members of the formerly enslaved population. When the land near the southeast coast was evenly redistributed, each family would have had 40 acres of tillable ground to use to sustain themselves. But Union generals were attempting to divide these slave plantations into smaller farm settlements and make them available to the newly freed slave. And this was said by Valerie Graham. She is the Director of Undergraduate Studies, African American and African Diaspora Studies, and a Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Indiana University in Bloomington. But there, she said, was no mention of mules. It didn't appear in the order, but some of the formerly enslaved populations were granted army mules, resulting in this reparations program being widely known as the 40 acres and a mule, which many of us are accustomed to hearing about. These freedmen set out to begin working their new land immediately, with a group of 1,000 settling in Georgia's Skidaway Island. In subsequent months, as many as 40,000 freedmen settled on the redistributed land. They were able to parcel it out to some of the former slaves, but for the most part, it was never ever realized. It was simply a dream, because Lincoln died. President Abraham Lincoln, he didn't die, he was killed. He was assassinated on April 15, 1865. And the government did not keep its promise of the 40 acres and the mule following his death. President Andrew Johnson rescinded Field Order 15, and this evil man returned to Confederate owners the 400,000 acres of land, a strip of coastline stretching from Charleston, South Carolina to the St. Johns River in Florida, including Georgia's Sea Islands and the mainland 30 miles in from the coast. Johnson was a racist and a segregationist, which you would think, if he believed in segregation, that would have been the perfect opportunity to separate from us. So he was probably a liar, because what he wanted was black people to be back in subjugation. He didn't want segregation, really. I would think that if you don't like us, you don't want us around, then you give us our land and let us separate, and we can live in peace separately. But there was no restitution or rights, no money, no food or land given to free black former slaves to call their own to work. And this caused a great hardship for the 3.9 million former slaves. It was a struggle just to survive after the Civil War ended. And many had no choice other than working for their former white slave masters, working the land as sharecroppers. And we've heard about sharecroppers, how many of them were cheated and mistreated. You either had to work as sharecroppers or tenant farmers, a system that was not much better than slavery, given the way in which they were used and abused, with little, if any, funds or wages. They were exploited to no end. There were many other proposals made after the war for reparations for former black slaves. However, Congress declined to go forward with paying reparations to black people that built this country, that cultivated these crops in this country, people that were raped in this country, tortured in this country, and even denied basic humanity in this country. It is said, and it is true today, because the mindset has been passed along to the descendants of the slave owners today. And that mindset is one that they seem to share. And that's the same attitude that was fluent among white Congress at that time in regards to the former black slaves and their descendants that was stolen and brought to America. And that sentiment is that they should simply be happy with being freed. But sharecropping was common in the South, and in the aftermath of black people not being able to acquire land that they had believed, they had been told the federal government was going to make available to them. They were lied to again, but there was a few that managed to become landowners, but for the most part, there was no land to call their own. are to pass on to the next generation. And this greatly prevented black people from accumulating wealth and left them largely under the same control of the same former Southern slave masters. Now, the failed promise of 40 acres and a mule denied these newly freed black former slaves any ability to generate financial self-sufficiency, especially in the midst of Jim Crow. Now, Jim Crow was based on a minstrel character, and the Jim Crow laws were laws put in place by the white government of America to prevent equal opportunities to black-skinned citizens like myself. It was legalized discrimination, denying black people jobs, education, financing of any kind, denying them the ability to live in certain places, laws that were skewed against them. It was purposely used to prevent them from prospering, and it existed and was enforced for about 100 years from the post-Civil War era until 1968. Black people who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws were often beaten. They were arrested, they were fined, they were held in office, they just were murdered or lynched with no repercussions. Now, I often think about what we could have achieved with reparations had it been given to black people upon releasing them from white bondage. It would have meant a better, a brighter, and kinder world for black people in America, because they could and would have had no choice but to develop their own society. And they would have made a society that was free from the oppression that many had to face with Jim Crow and the discrimination, tricks, and lies of their former slave masters. Now, the year following 1865, freedmen in Texas organized the first of what became the annual celebration of Jubilee Day on June 19th. In the ensuing decades, Juneteenth commemorations featured music, barbecues, dancing, prayer services, and other community activities. And as more black people migrated from Texas to other parts of the country, the Juneteenth tradition spread as well. In 1979, Texas became the first state to make Juneteenth an official holiday, and several others followed suit over the years. And in June of 2021, Congress passed a resolution establishing Juneteenth as a federally recognized holiday. President Biden signed it into law on June 17th, 2021. But notice, President Biden decided to make Juneteenth an official recognized federal holiday, but he made no mention or attempt to offer reparations to these descendants of slaves. President Biden nor any other since Lincoln have ever honestly and seriously even considered or attempted to right the wrong of slavery with actual reparations. Many refuse to even speak on the subject or the need or even the debt that is due and owed. And none have even attempted to initiate a reparations packet or bill that would compensate the descendants of those enslaved black people here in America. But they continue to want your votes. So as we commemorate and observe at our Juneteenth events this weekend and our celebrations, just take a moment to reflect on our ancestors, their struggles, and all the achievements, as well as our continued fight for actual freedom, actual justice, actual equality. Take just a moment and reflect on that. We have to also continue to demand our reparations. Reparations are owed and they are due to the black descendants of slaves in America. The reparations that are yet to be received or even realized from this same exact government of America. This is the same government. the same America that legalized black slavery, the same America, the same government that enforced black discrimination against former black slaves. The same government that benefited from black oppression, and the same government that has yet to compensate those descendants of the black slaves to this very day. So I want to wish all of you a happy Juneteenth, and I want to thank you for listening. Please subscribe and leave your thoughts on this topic of discussion. And you can also join me right here on this same channel next time for a daily discussions with Dena.
This concludes the Daily Discussions with Dena. Join us Monday through Friday at 12:30 p.m. Like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment.